Hey, I'm Scott Hanselman. I'm here still with Glenn Condren.
Howdy.
And this is continuing the Microsoft Virtual Academy Introduction to ASP.NET 5. We're going to take a little bit of a sidecar, a little bit of a fork, and we're just going to talk about basic debugging.
Yeah.
Because we had some interesting problems in the last module that we were able to fix, but you're going to have other problems as you go and write your application. All applications have bugs.
Yeah.
And debugging them can be a little bit confusing. So we're just going to look at how Visual Studio allows you to pick different ways to start your application, different browsers, show you some tips on things like incognito mode, explore the relationship with what Visual Studio gives you versus what your browser gives you as far as things like F12 tools, and also things like call stacks and locals and watches.
Yeah.
All right?
That's good.
Cool.
We have been trying to show you tips and tricks as we go through the course of the thing. This one's kind of just a little focus section, as well as all the other things we've told you, like in the last episode and places like that.
Right. So we'll start in Visual Studio right here, and you'll notice this drop down right here. This is the one that I've been pushing all this time. It's got that play button, and you'll notice that it has IIS Express by default. IIS Express, of course, is that little local web server, but it also has this thing here called just web.
Yeah.
Now I'm going to click that one. I'm going to select web instead of IIS Express and press that. And you'll notice that a little DOS box, a little command prompt started up, and instead of a high port 48111 or whatever, we're getting one that's called port 5000. We are running our little ASP.NET application from the command line.
Yeah, this is much more closer to the metal, I guess. Very bare bones. It's start up a process and just have my thing listen on it and return you some stuff.
And it's still the same application.
Yeah.
The only difference is that the web server is ourself. We are self-hosting.
Yeah, we are self-hosted is what we call this.
So if I hit refresh, you can see things are happening. Yeah. But if I close this,
you'll notice that down the bottom right down there. Remember, we kept making a big deal about this IIS Express thing running in your tray.
Oh yeah, it's not down there anymore.
Because this console is everything that would have been done by IIS Express is being done by this console. Exactly. And it doesn't do as much as IIS would do, right? So there are differences between these two models.
But if I hit refresh, things are happening, and I want to close the DOS box. I know it's not DOS, but I like to call it DOS box. And I hit refresh again.
Now it's gone.
It's gone.
Yeah.
It's not working. Okay. And you make that selection from here.
Yeah.
All right. The other thing that's worth pointing out here is where it says web browser. So you can pick different browsers. Now, by default, you're going to get this automatically set up with the browsers it detects. So it found Firefox, it found Chrome, it found IE, it found Edge.
Yeah.
I added these. Incognito, right? This is the don't save cookies and don't save history mode for those popular browsers.
Yeah.
The way you do that is you go to the Browse With dialog box.
Incognito mode is great in general for those of you watching who are just learning web development in general.
Right, and the reason that it's useful, right, isn't just to hide gifts that you buy on Amazon for your wife, because I know that's why I use incognito mode. It's to avoid things like cookies getting stuck or caching or authentication, all the kinds of issues that involve you having visited a website twice.
Yeah, we saw a very, very brief caching error really early on in one of our earlier modules where we changed a view and then we went back to it, and for a second it was the same as it was before, and we hit refresh and then it was different.
Right.
It's very easy, or very common as you're learning how to write web applications, that you'll end up in this situation where you're not really sure why, but you changed some code and then you went to the site and it still was doing the same thing as before, and you can't really work out why. And chances are that's some sort of caching issue or something like that, where the browser or something in between you and your host is being helpful and remembering and not what you had before and giving it to you instead of rerunning your code.
And adding incognito mode for development purposes is going to prevent you from having to clear cookies all the time and mess up your regular browser.
Yeah, especially important when you start trying to add auth and then you actually are creating your own cookies and to authenticate to your site.
Another nice trick is if you're using something like Firefox, you can add in custom profiles and then call those profiles from the command line. Yeah. So I'm going to click here on where it says Browse With. You'll see that I've added -private for Internet Explorer. and -- incognito for Chrome. And all you have to do is hit add, find the browser, whatever browser it is, and then add in some arguments. One of the other things that you can do is you can, of course, set your default, but also you can hold down the control key, like I'm holding down,
Yep.
and you can set multiple browsers as the default. So now I've set Firefox and Chrome as the default. And then when I run my application, I can actually launch both of them at the same time and go off and look at my application. It's a nice little tip, especially if you have multiple monitors.
Yeah, I mean, and you often end up needing to do this because you don't know what browser is going to be hitting your web application. And whilst Bootstrap, like we talked about earlier, Bootstrap makes it a lot easier to have your stuff look consistent across all the browsers because it does most of your styling for you. As soon as you start doing some of your own CSS and your own layout and stylings, you'll probably fairly quickly hit a point where things don't quite look the same in Firefox and Internet Explorer or Internet or Edge and Firefox or something like that.
Right.
And then you need to go and work out what the differences are between those two and see if you can fix your CSS or your layout or something.
At the bottom of this menu here, it says More Emulators.
Yeah.
If you click on More Emulators, that's actually going to take you up to ASP.NET/mobile. And this is an interesting resource that's available. This allows you to do things like downloading iPhone and iPad simulators for Windows.
Yeah.
This is from a great company called Electric Plum, and they let you have simulators for iOS simulators. And they're not just Chrome in a frame. They are actually very sophisticated simulators. Browser Stack is really great. This is hosted browser virtualization, if you've ever used this before.
Interesting.
They will,
There's lots of words.
They will fire up a copy of like an old Mac and an old browser on an old Mac. And then they will remote desktop you using a technology called VNC in the browser. Even better, though, they can extend Visual Studio. So you could go and say, I want OS 9 or OS 10 on Snow Leopard on this Mac, on this size of a screen, on this old Firefox 37.
Yeah.
And they take care of that for you, and that's really great.
Yep.
The other thing that we can support is Android via our Android emulator, Opera Mini,
Amazing.
whatever you want. So all of those are optional things that you can plug in.
And you might be thinking that nobody is using such old browsers and operating systems,
Nope.
but you're going to be amazed as soon as you have a real big site that lots of people are using.
Yep, they absolutely are. One other thing I wanted to point out as we talk about debugging is I can go to my project here and right-click, and I can say Properties, and here's some more things that are going on. This drop down here, Profile, that's the same as this one here.
Yeah.
So it says, what do you want to launch? You have control over what do you want to launch, even if you wanted to add your own custom command. If there was some batch file or some shell script that you wanted to launch, you can do that.
Interestingly in here, that web thing is actually configured as well in your project.json. We probably won't talk about it much here, but yeah.
And then in the future, you might say, I want specific versions of the framework. And then that port, that random port, perhaps you want that port to be a specific port.
Yeah.
You want to hard code that.
We're going to talk about that ASP.NET Env in the future as well, in a future module.
In the next module, we'll talk about environments. Right now, we are currently in development, so we're in an development environment.
Yeah.
You can also turn on authentication and then also do testing under SSL. We'll automatically set up a self-signed SSL certificate for you.
Which is amazing because they're not trivial.
Yeah, it's kind of a hassle to do that in other ways.
Yeah.
So this is the same application we've been working on. We're going to show you a couple more things around debugging. Here I have set breakpoint. I'll set a breakpoint here. Here's a more sophisticated breakpoint. Notice how when I hit the breakpoint there, it fills up the entire line. That's because that actually is entirely one line.
Yeah.
I just happened to break it up a little bit.
For the sake of readability.
For readability. So we're going to go ahead and hit Start, which is going to debug. This is Start with debugging. Okay. Now, when we do that, the diagnostics tools pop out on the right-hand side. These are new in Visual Studio. You can get rid of them if you want to. You can make them as big or as small as you want, but they're actually pretty darn useful. Now, I'm on a reasonably low resolution screen, not a screen you would typically do active debugging on. So you have to bear with the fact that some of these are smaller. But I do want to point out that these can be resized. They can be pinned and unpinned. So there's a lot going on here.
Yeah.
But like any dashboard, once you start using it, you're going to find it to be quite familiar.
Yeah.
At the top up here, we have the amount of memory being used. So if I start running around. Oops. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my breakpoints so I can click around quickly. You'll notice that there's
You can see a little bump there now.
a little bump there as it hit that page for the first time and compiled it, and now the memory doesn't go up as I hit that page, right?
Yeah.
I can pick moments in time and see what memory was and see if I'm leaking memory or using too much as my diagnostic session goes on. I can also see events that happened at those particular moments in time. This is almost a kind of a profiler that's letting you know what's going on. I can come down here and see memory usage and take snapshots and see what's going on in my memory, and I can do diagnostic CPU usage type events. What I typically want to care about, though, are things like my breakpoints, when they happened and how long I was at that breakpoint and things like that.
Yeah.
Down here, we've got some tabs. There's the call stack. So let's go ahead and put in a breakpoint here and hit refresh.
Yeah, we briefly mentioned this, I think, in our first module.
Right, in our very first module, we turned on just my code because it was overwhelming to see everyone else's code.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that call stack, if I were calling into another function, would increase, and then when I left that function, it would fall down again, it would go away.
We also showed the thing where we showed this once before, but when you step,
so if I step forward,
and it gives you that little thing, 2 milliseconds elapsed.
Yep. So it told me that that was a very quick thing, and we just stepped over. So these are events that are occurring. Yeah. And different versions of Visual Studio will give you more or less information. You'll get more on Enterprise, but everyone does have the diagnostic tools available to them. So if I click on breakpoints, here you've got the breakpoints. You can disable them without removing them if you're doing debugging.
Could have done that earlier.
Could have done that earlier, but we can also do something like, I only want to break on a condition. So for example, this one here, I might want to say, well, I only want to break here if P, our person, is null. Because maybe I'm going to be running through this multiple times, and then every once in a while I end up with P is null, I don't know why. You can go and put those conditions in.
Yeah.
And then when that condition happens, well, I want to log a message. I want to tell somebody about that. I want to do something. So you have a lot more flexibility. Breakpointing is the most obvious thing, the most typical thing you learn when you're doing debugging. But it's way more powerful when you've got an IDE that allows you to do things like this.
Yes.
You can also go and put in filters, information about what function you're currently on when those breakpoints happen. And you can even say things like, I only want to break here the 10th time that this ran.
Yeah.
So if you catch yourself going, break, step F5, step, then maybe say, well, wait a second, what am I really doing? You shouldn't be hitting your buttons and doing that, waiting for debug.
Yeah, the tooling can help you if you've got a loop and it only breaks on the 100th iteration or when some particular circumstances are. You can set that up in your breakpoint. Then just press F5 once and it'll just run until it gets those conditions that you want. And that's the fastest way to achieve this.
Down here past breakpoints, we've got output. And output's going to show you all sorts of things are starting up, things are happening from modules are loading and things like that. But also if you wanted to output things with what we call got here debugging. That's not a Microsoftism, that's just a computer science thing.
Yeah.
You just say, log.writeLine or debug.writeLine, I got here and I got here.
Yeah.
What's really interesting, though, I find, are locals and autos. And these are showing you the variables that are currently visible in the scope of the current function.
Yeah.
So I'm going to change my breakpoint, and I'm going to put it up here. And I'm going to run this one again. All right? So we're going to hit about one more time. And this time, I want about to break here. So at this moment, in about, P is null. Now, I can hit F10, which is the hotkey, or I can click here where it says step over. I'm going to press F10.
Yep. And then again.
Now, P is still null, but suddenly there's this view data dictionary. And inside there it has one item, the message.
Yep.
F10 again. Now there's P. I can see that as well. Now check this out. I can hover over P, and it'll show me that. there's a pin over here on P. There's like a push pin, okay? And sometimes I got to race after these guys. I don't know how to do this. There it is. Hit that push pin, and it can be drug around. It's a little post-it note for yourself. You can even leave a note, something about that person at that moment. Open it up and pin individual things. Like I really am concerned that p.firstname keeps changing.
Yeah, it's null for some reason. I don't know why or something.
Well, I can also cause errors.
Yeah.
I can change the value there, and you'll notice that it turns red.
Yeah, because it's been modified since you pinned it.
Exactly. So you see, I just changed Scott to Foo if I was going to maybe cause an error.
And that would go red if you'd done that programmatically in code as well. It's not just because you typed in that window that it
Right,
went red.
if it got changed by someone else.
Yeah.
I'm still sitting here on the view, right? And I can go and ask questions about P
Yeah.
or possibly change P without
Yeah.
leaving
you could
that.
play around with stuff like when we were doing that date formatting earlier on, for example. In here, you could put in p.birthdate.toString, and you could maybe mess around with the format string that you wanted to try out different things. You hit enter each time and see. It's kind of a way to experiment with some code on the fly.
Exactly, and this is what we call an active debugging session. I'm in the middle of this session. When I start again, all of these changes will go away, and even when I hit this about one more time, it'll go away.
Yeah.
So if I go back over to locals, we see person. Now I'm going to hit F10 again, which again is
Step over.
step over. In Visual Studio 2015, which is what we're using, you can see not just this, which is the controller, not just P, but also the return value that just happened.
Yeah.
That view result just got sent out. And we can poke around and look at that, and we can see that, oh, we're sending a model of type person
Yeah.
off into a view along with
This message key that we created.
a bag of stuff.
Yeah. This is basically the return type of what that view method is that's on our base class that we talked about earlier.
And then at this point, once we leave, I'm going to hit, now we're going to go and render that view.
About page. Yep.
All right, and it'll show you how long we spent doing that, which in this case was
It was a long time.
an overtly long time. You don't typically spend 3 or 4 or 5 minutes in there, so in that case, it's going to time out. All right?
Yeah.
I'll start another debugging session. We're attaching the debugger, and we're not necessarily attaching the debugger to the browser in this case, although that is happening. We're really focused on the server-side code at this point.
I mean, we're launching the browser, but really that's just a way for us to send a request. We're not debugging the browser in any real way here.
I can go and set individual watches. The locals are just things that are local, but if I have other things I want to set, like P or P dot first name,
Yeah.
which at this point should be not just null, but we'll actually throw an exception.
Because it's trying to retrieve this null thing and do something with it.
Exactly. Now, one of the things that we saw, I'm going to go ahead and run this and keep going, was the relationship between the debugger that we've just seen on the server side and coming in here and saying either inspect element or saying F12 developer tools. Now, those developer tools are very similar between Edge, which I'm using, or Chrome or Firefox.
Yeah.
The general idea with those tools is you're going to want to look at what's happening in the browser on the client side. So I'm going to snap that and snap that. So now I've got my page, I've got my developer tools, and within here I can start changing stuff. This is not changing source code, right? We're changing things like the color of the text on the page,
Yeah.
or changing margins to make the
Seeing
page
what they
look
look
different.
like.
Yeah, because you never know.
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a great way for you to play around with why is that text box looks a bit funny, you know?
Right, and if you want to know, well, who exactly set the color to red? Oh, it was Bootstrap line 302, and I can click there and actually go and check that out. Additionally, if I want to find out, well, who made that button? I can right-click, hit Inspect Element, shows up right there, but you'll notice that I can also see those elements appear inside of Visual Studio as well.
We showed that earlier.
We showed that earlier.
Thing. Yeah, so there's also a console in here, right?
So when I click on the console here, I'm going to see events that are occurring in the browser. And this is really important as you're starting web development, as you're spending a lot of time doing modern web development.
Yeah.
Remember what's happening in the server versus what's happening on the client. There is no super console that shows all of these things.
No. And yeah, so in here you're going to see errors with JavaScript that's running on your page and things like that. If you, but you're not going to see, you know, something that you write to the console on the server.
Right.
There's no relationship between those two consoles.
So you'll find yourself jumping back and forth very often. Yeah. Now there is also a debugger inside of the browser. All browsers have this. This is going to be debugging JavaScript.
Yes.
So if we wanted to go and dig around in some of that validation code,
we could do that.
We would have done that with this here.
You can see that validation code even if you go click on that JavaScript file in the thing, right?
Yeah, so you can go and actually see the code that is available in all of those files, including right there,
that one.
Validate.
Yeah.
Now, additionally, there's things like performance that you can do. So I could go and say, I'm going to start looking at the performance of my app. Our application doesn't really do anything interesting, so performance doesn't make a lot of sense. But what's fun about that is to showcase the difference between the diagnostics tools that are available in Visual Studio versus the ones that are available in the browser. So here we're seeing what's happening on the server and the code and the memory being used. And here we're seeing things like frames per second. Is my animations
slowing down?
Slowing down for some reason? How much time was spent loading JavaScript versus drawing what was on the screen?
Yes.
That's all beyond the scope of this, but I want you to know that this exists.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, this is really
knowing that these things exist
stuff.
is half of the battle.
Yes, exactly. If you're saying, gosh, why is my data grid slow, or why did this picture go slow? That took a half a second to paint.
Yeah.
Well, why exactly? You can dig down as much as you want and see exactly why that happened. So this is more advanced, but definitely worth checking out.
Yeah.
Last thing I want to show you, as to close our debugging here, is you can tell your browser to pretend to be other kinds of browsers. So for example,
you have an error over there in the console, which is interesting. Maybe we should click that.
Oh, invalid syntax. Some browser link got shut off or something. So you can see that there's an error.
We happen to have caused like an unimportant error.
Yes, in our messing around, we caused
messing around. But that would show that's exactly what would happen if you had a bug in your JavaScript code or something like that. Yeah.
So here under emulation, I can go and say, well, I want to pretend to be a mobile browser. I'm going to lie and say that I'm an iPad and see if my website behaves differently.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to simulate that someone's rotated the screen and behaved a different way. And this one's really valuable. Let's make this a certain resolution, right? And then have that change my website.
Yeah. Interestingly, I remember having to use these tools to make a poorly written website that had a lot of assumptions about, like a very old website that had never been updated for a long time. I have used those tools in the past to get that site to work in a modern browser by, pretend to be IE6 and pretend to be this resolution so the screen lays out properly and a bunch of things like that.
Absolutely.
Not frequently, but every now and then.
So we're going to take a short break, and we're going to come back and look at doing configuration and what it means to have an environment and app settings and all the kind of ambient information that your application needs to function.
Explain some more of that stuff that you've seen in the layout pages and the startup CS.
Cool. Stick with us.
See you then.